I'm just being thick here, but you have considerable confidence in the assignation of paternity because of these consortships. Seems perfectly reasonable.
I certainly don't have considerable confidence, but yeah.
Well, I mean, you said that they're gone for 5 to 7 days.
Yeah, it's a reliable, I think most people would agree it's a reliable proxy, yeah.
Fine, okay, well, they're hanging out together. They're not, they're hanging out together, fair enough. So my question is, if you know that, why don't the baboons? So if I'm an alpha, and according to your model, I cede some conceptions to subordinates, and those subordinates and I both know that they're hanging out with a particular female and therefore have relatively high paternity certainty. That doesn't get me anything in terms of protecting my offspring from an invading infanticidal male, because I know that's not my kid. And that subordinate male is going to protect that kid, but he's not going to protect the kids that I produced with other females through other consorts.
Good point, and something that people get very animated about in the discipline more generally. And the standard response is that, on average, ovulation will occur at a certain period within a female's receptive window. So we're normally thinking about the last 3 days of the cycle. But there is stochasticity in its occurrence, and this stochasticity is sufficient to generate uncertainty. The extent to which so the argument goes, is enough to engender some form of at minimum disinterest, as opposed to wanting to kill it, an assurance of zero paternity, and at best an inclination to protect.
Well, if that's the case, then we need the molecular data, basically, because what the dominant males may be doing is monopolizing the prime part of that reproductive window.
Well, they certainly are. I mean, that's exactly what they're doing. And a recent study came out. In fact, were you on this paper? No. Showing that the paternity consortship guarding behavior is a good predictor of paternity and of subsequent inclination to protect. But it is not always the case that males who protect their kids are males protecting kids. Yeah, you tell him. Oh, yeah. And yeah, so the point being that there are males are tricked by this. It does happen that males are tricked. They end up investing in infants that aren't their own. But it's more often the case that it is actual paternity true paternity that underlies it.
Well, it seems to me that then that just means that selection should factor that in, right? That doesn't undermine the basic objection that the alpha male doesn't really get that much by ceding these opportunities. So if he knows with some probability whether or not the offspring is his, right? Then the subordinates only protect the offspring that they have high confidence in.
Yeah, no, definitely.
They don't protect the dominants.
Definitely.
So he doesn't gain anything.
Well, my counter is that it is the case that non-fathers, actually molecularly demonstrated fathers, do protect. And I also have been concerned about this as well. And I've done a bit of modelling with Richard to show that a potentially more plausible mechanism is that, given there's all this variance and instability in the size of the male cohort, and given that we know there's quite a lot of work showing that males, the inclination of a male to immigrate into a group is a function of the size of the resident male cohort, maybe a more plausible route is that by ceding paternity, encouraging subordinates remain in the group, you're actually reducing the rate at which unpleasant males come into the group. That is something I similarly was worried, and therefore dreamt up a far-fetched plan.
No, that strikes me as more plausible.
No, yeah.
Yeah, I do have a question. So I wanted to know a little bit about how it's on the ground, as it were. So when the alpha male is not mate guarding with a receptive female, he's not interested in that female. There is a consortship. So what you're counting as subordinate conceptions, there is a marked consortship.
Yeah, so just as I put it to you that when a dominant male mates guards a female for 5 days in a row, that's a cue to paternity, to true paternity. Then when a dominant male isn't guarding a female, it's the case that a subordinate is doing exactly the same thing. He's maintaining this exclusive mating association for a period of days.
What fraction of females are mate guarded? What fraction fraction of conceptions come from mate-guarded episodes?
All of them.
That's interesting.
And indeed, we were really surprised to find that, in fact, all successful copulations come from mate guarding. Everything occurs within the context of mate guarding.
So I was thinking about comparisons both from your data to the Miami data, and also to Amboseli, where there's, I mean, in East Africa, there's, I think, essentially no infanticide.
Yeah.
And so I was just trying to figure out, I'm sort of mentally trying to translate this into what would be happening in those East African groups, where there's quite a bit of skew, but quite variable amounts of skew. So Susan Albert says there was a paper on the
2006, 2003.
She looks at, there's as much variation in the degree of skew within a group, within a single group, as there is across all the baboon groups.
Yeah.
And
The big thing, if I can interject, the big thing is that in the East Africans, the yellows and the Nubis, subordinates form coalitions that undermine the ability of dominant males to kind of maintain exclusive associations, and you don't have them in
we still have a
chacma.
lot of skew. You'd think that would reduce the amount of skew, and I don't think it is.
In the yellow, you mean? Well, it's definitely less than the chacma, though.
Well,
I mean, the variance is monumental. Sometimes it's skewed. Sometimes, it's like it's some kind of egalitarian system.
That's why we need more of the actual molecular data. So I was wondering about the skew. So from the Miami data, there's skew data now, and it'd be interesting to really compare
Yeah, no, definitely.
what actually happened in those two kinds of groups where there's. So that would be interesting. Also, one of my questions, the reason I asked about the mate guarding is because you had duration of guarding as your
Response.
And yet, although there is some possibility of a female conceiving outside the, after D-3 or D-2.
Yeah.
I mean, 20 days is probably more than you need.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Right?
And
So I was wondering if mate guarding at the opportune, there was, anyway, I'm wondering what those guys are doing hanging around all that time. And secondly, whether if the subordinate males are there at the critical moments, basically, but I guess they are.
well, I think they are, and I think what you've alluded to something important, which is this: the hypothesis I put forward here I think would only work in systems like chacma because the power of dominant males is so unusually high. The power gradient between dominants and subordinates is massive, and so, the reason I say that, and because you were talking, I was thinking that dominant males, they're very laissez-faire. They just walk around with their female, don't really care about what's going on, because subordinates really don't want to go near them. They're very, very male phobic. And so I think when you have this kind of idea will only hold in systems where there's a profound asymmetry in physical ability, competitive ability between dominants and subordinates. Yep.
I kind of had a two-part question. One was on any given year, the number of adult females that are receptive. And I was asking because I was wondering whether it's typical that the alpha male sires a particular number of offspring in a year, because there's kind of a maximum number of infants that he could provide good protection for. So if he sires just 5 offspring, and he could keep an eye on those, even if there is a new male that comes in, versus if he were to have 20, and then there would be just far too many for him to monitor, and then that would make each infant much more.
Definitely. And well, so the first thing to say is there is a nice study, quite old study now, showing that males do compete for the protective attentions of males, and they have a priority of access in order of rank. And so I mean, if there are these kind of suddenly stochastic concentrations of conceptive cycles, then it's true that there will be a lot of vulnerable infants present at the one time. And I would argue that just increases the need for some form of countermeasure. It's not just mortality then you're worrying about. It's not just your absence that you're worrying about. It's the fact that you may well be in the group, but just simply not in a position to ensure everyone's okay.
I was just wondering, because you were mentioning how complete monopolization wouldn't necessarily be adaptive, and so I was wondering if this was a case where it's not necessarily concession, it's just a limited number that you can protect yourself, and therefore whether other subordinate males sire offspring doesn't matter so much.
Well, So you're saying that they don't pursue these extra conceptions because they anticipate they won't be in a position to protect them subsequently.
That's my question, whether that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure why they would then just voluntarily give them away anyway. If they're worried about those infants not surviving, then why not just have a go anyway?
I guess it's true. I mean, there would be, there could be other criteria they select to protect certain infants over others, but I was just curious.
No, I mean, a good point, but I think
number that they tend to sire every year.
I don't think I think they would, if they're worried about whether the kid is going to die or not, and they anticipate not being in a position to protect it, then why not just have a go rather than just give it away anyway?
I was wondering what evidence you have that males act as infant protectors.
Well, so on the ground, it's a good point. The first thing to say is that males, on any given day, you look at a male, you look at a protector male, he really couldn't care less. And it's really the females that are trying to create the situation where a male will serve a protective purpose. And so there are cases where males, you do see a male running around actually holding an infant, and you do see cases where males actually confront infanticidal males. But I think probably the kind of primary form of protection they provide is that males don't really like approaching each other, even if they're really out to whack something, and they cast this protective shadow. And I think you find a lot of it seems to be just maintaining proximity to a male for the female is sufficient to reduce the risk of infanticide. But it only works if that male is inclined to actually hang around by you, because obviously you're going to draw the heat. So
Is there something different about the demographics of the females that subordinate males are mating with? Are they more likely to be nulliparous? Are they younger? Are they?
So these are all non-nulliparous adult sexually receptive females.
Okay.
So you have these three predictions, and I don't understand why the second two really are unique to your story. So suppose that it's not a concession, but that these subordinate conceptions occur just because the other guys, because of the reasons you tried to exclude with the first prediction. But let's suppose you're wrong about that. Then it seems to me that the other two follow anyhow. That the guys that are successfully had kids will stick around longer because they need to protect them. And there'll be fewer infanticides because they're sticking around to protect them. So,
well, my intention was to demonstrate the potential for that kind of strategy to work. And I mean, you're right. It doesn't. The second predictions aren't a refutation of the classical model, right, but they are a prerequisite for a concessionary strategy to be viable.
But they don't discriminate between the two models.
No, I think I can't be confident of my hypothesis if I can't demonstrate that it's actually going to, the mechanics are going to hold. Yep.
I was wondering, you don't have the detail of how many pairs were sired by only one subordinate or many subordinates. I'm wondering, did you observe any conflict when the alpha male is absent and the subordinate compete with the reproductive counts?
Sorry,
So I'm wondering, did you observe the conflict between subordinate to compete over the...
Oh, you mean within the ranks of the subordinates? It's certainly the case that subordinates do compete amongst themselves. Yeah, I mean, I put it to you, yeah, they do. But I don't have data here to show you. But subordinates do compete amongst themselves. And I mean, there's nothing a dominant male could do about that. I mean, he can't police he can't kind of mediate. Yeah.
So you showed the data on the 5 actual infanticides, right? And the who was there, the primary and the subordinate. But do you have data on infanticide attempts that you could look similarly at the composition to see if that because I would think.
Yeah, I mean that's the kind of the flip side. Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I mean we do, but yeah. Good point.
So, I'm curious about another possibility is that the longer alpha males are in place, the more worn out, tired, depleted they become. So that
In terms of their kind of tenure, yeah.
their physical
Yeah.
condition and their ability to track what's going on, and it's harder work after, and their tenures are short, and it suggests that they really can only hold on for a short period because tenures tend to be very short. So I'm curious about the timing of subordinate conceptions with respect to the
They tend to be later in the tenure,
yeah.
as you do.
That's not, and then it seems to me that
I sense I know where you're going with this. Maybe it's in a way to kind of increase your longevity. Is that the?
no,
Oh.
actually, I have a darker view of it. then that's another kind of constraint, right? That it's just you just don't have quite the energy to run around and dominate
true.
everybody else. On the other hand, here's that's consistent with your hypothesis is your kids are most vulnerable at the end of your tenure. So some of your kids, if you're lucky, are pretty much out of the danger zone
Yeah.
by the time.
Well, so important to say that tenure is an average like 10 months. So
Right.
so there's always
If you're lucky, and you've killed all those other babies, right?
yeah.
So you've got those girls lined up. Your babies are pretty close to the end of your, you've had a lot of infants early on in your tenure, and as time wears on, you shift your worries about mating now versus protecting your kids. So that's an argument for your hypothesis.
Yeah.
So the data go either way, but it seems to me they're interesting. That fact is interesting.
Yeah. I think one thing to say is then why. If so, you're implying that males kind of during their tenure, their alpha tenure, they experience some kind of transition from a competitive to a more protective approach.
Well, from a constraint perspective, okay. So the fact is that subordinates get more conceptions when the alpha has been in place longer.
Yep.
Okay. So that fact, there's two ways to interpret that fact. One way is it's a constraint.
Yep. Yep.
They're just too tired.
Yeah.
They just can't manage anymore.
It's important to say, though, in response to that, they always vigorously contest challenges on the alpha spot. So they clearly,
Yeah, but maybe they're not as persuasive. Maybe they don't choose to take up all the challenges, right? You got to let some go, right? Because you're conserving your strength or whatever. But the other interpretation of that is that as your tenure increases, and you have the shadow of the future shorter, and so you are more concerned about that other possibility, which is that you will be overthrown and your kids will be killed. So you are more interested in that in the benefits you get from ceding. So
yeah, and that would be the logical interpretation with this hypothesis.
That fact.
No, I mean I see your point. I see your point. Yeah.
Well, it's actually just a footnote to that, given I didn't realize that tenure was so short, but the conceptions at the end or towards the end of your tenure, they're free because, I mean, if you know that you're going to lose tenure fairly soon, then...
But you don't know. I mean, it's important to say that you don't know.
Well, I mean, but...
I mean, you're playing the mean, I guess.
Selection can calculate what the average tenure is, right? So that should be built into the system. Then, fathering offspring that are going to be killed, because you're going to be usurped sometime before they're independent is a waste of time. So it doesn't, it's not a concession in the sense that giving away something that has no value doesn't.
But your argument is that you shouldn't bother siring a kid because you imagine that it probably won't survive. But why not just sire it and play the odds anyway?
Because if there are opportunity costs, if you could be protecting the kids who are close to being independent, right? You father them all within the first couple of months of your tenure, so they're almost independent. They're almost likely to be past the window of infanticide risk. Spend your time protecting those, and don't worry about conceptions that you couldn't protect anyway.
Yeah, that seems an open goal though for someone who just tried it anyway. So the important thing to say firstly is infanticide is relatively rare, so you're only providing this investment infrequently, and so you're saying to me that on average those kids are going to die anyway. So why bother? Why not just give them away? I put it to you that then why not have a go? If you think they're going to die anyway, why not try? You don't care either way.
Right, I just.
priority of access permits you to make, to
Sure,
sire them.
opportunity cost, if it, you know, whatever time, energy, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a trade-off in in
Okay,
between investment and
that
mating.
matters, yeah, yeah.
But it seems like that goes against what you told us earlier, given how long these mate guarding episodes are. I mean, investing 5 or 7 or 20 days, that's a serious time investment.
No, definitely.
So, I don't know, I guess I have to agree with Dan here. Really.
So you think there's this trade-off between protection and
Yeah,
mating?
presumably if you're mate guarding, you can't put a whole lot of effort into watching your current kids who are about to hit that, that age limit. Where they're
No, fair point, fair point.
Sure, it may not happen very often, but all it takes is 10 seconds, right? I mean,
No, yeah.
infanticide happens like that.
Yeah, but it
and-
only happens when there's a new male.
Yeah,
You
but
don't have to watch him every minute.
no, you don't. But if you're mate guarding, your attention is elsewhere.
Oh, yeah, but
I don't know,
think
I
when
just
there's a new
feel
male in the
like-
group, your attention is,
Yeah, I mean, I see your point. I think, and that makes intuitive sense. But I don't think it happens sufficiently frequently to undermine my argument. Obviously, ideally, I'd show you devastating data, but
why don't the office stick around? This is such a big deal, why are they leaving?
well, I think a lot of it is because they often resist these challenges by the infanticidal males who also want to take the top spot, and it's hard work. And when I was doing my PhD, there were at least 2 cases where an incumbent just had the crap beaten out of him, and he dropped off the radar. One of them came back like 6-7 months later, reappeared.
But if he's, so why not, so that would argue for some kind of, you go out and do your Wahoo contest, you assess your likelihood of holding on to your rank, you figure out, this is, you quickly assess, am I going to make it or not? You
And acquiesce, you mean? Just
you grovel, and then you stick around, being a friend to your
Yeah.
mates, the female.
you hang up your gloves. Yeah, no, that's
Stick around.
definitely a fair point.
These guys aren't. I don't think they get this opportunity more than once in their lifetime to be an alpha male. Do you think?
Do they get it more than once?
Do you think that they are going to go off to some other group and have a glory time again?
No.
Or Jerry Brown.
Yeah.
It seems like it would be interesting to, I think this seems to me an interesting modeling problem too, where you can look at the
It's
different.
funny you should say that. That is indeed what I've been spending much of my time doing.
Can I just ask, your model, your analysis treats the females as if they're completely passive. And
Well, it doesn't, because I invoke the female.
but they're only involved in, that they're completely passive in the sense that they're devoted to protecting their infants. But is there any sign, because I know Franz de Waal has written about this, and as you could, I've just revealed I'm not a primatologist. Right?
Okay. I didn't want to say it, but
But he talks about how in chimpanzees, the females will actually have preferences and will support the candidacies of certain would-be alpha males. Is there any sign of that in baboons? Because if you're a female and what you want is for your infants not to be killed, you would actually support the campaign of an alpha male who's good at attracting cooperative subordinates. So is there any sign of the females having any influence on the politics here?
I'm unclear on the question. So do females kind of mediate inter-male competition? And
Yes.
And she's suggesting that females form alliances that support males who are likely to concede conceptions to subordinates and thereby reduce infanticide.
the short answer
That's
is,
what I'm suggesting.
yeah, the short answer is no.
Okay.
I think that there's kind of I'll say that for a number of reasons. First is, as I probably overstate that females really are so much smaller than males that they really have no ability to influence what a male does in any way. And baboons aren't nearly as political as chimpanzees. I think no is the...
I will take no as an answer.
Okay, good.
So, I'm interested also in sort of developmental psychology, and I'm wondering what you think might be adaptations on part of the infant that they might use to reduce infanticide.
Well, I think one thing to say is that the natal coat, I would argue, engenders very clear responses in males. It also highlights the fact that you'd be good to whack, but it's definitely the case that males are very, very tolerant of infants with black coats. I don't have a, oh well, so that's quite a good picture. You see, males are really, really bad-tempered, and they're really unpleasant animals, but you can hang an infant with a natal coat off any part of his body and he will do nothing. He's incredibly tolerant of them. And everyone is very keenly interested in infants with natal coats. And so I think that the natal coats are a result of selection on infants to kind of ensure care, to engender a protective response, a caring response from males and females. But yeah, it obviously does flag that you are good to be whacked by.
So that's very interesting. And do you think there's also psychological adaptations that the infant has, for instance, cries or other things that it might do to reduce?
Well, they're certainly, yeah, I mean, when they're very, very young, they're very, so there is a correlation between how noisy a kid is and if it has a natal coat and the responses of surrounding adults, definitely. I mean, I think more, when I say that, I'm thinking more about, so females are very interested in each other's kids and if, in each other's infants, and if one female's managed to get another female's infant away from it by grooming and kind of pacifying the female, that infant makes a loud noise, then the mother generally gets very animated. And on a number of occasions, if you're wondering, are following baboons, and you're unfortunate enough to make a black infant scream out right next to you, then you really know that adult males are alarming animals.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. How well is the male can recognize their offspring, their own offspring?
Sorry, say again?
How well the male can recognize their own offspring? Is there any cues there?
Well, there's lots of recent work suggesting that down the line, males have some understanding of who their kin are, who their kids are, and the most plausible explanation is this is due to familiarity, just through your association. There's no real evidence of phenotypic matching in baboons. And in terms of actual infanticide and infanticidal protection, it's really females who situate the infant in a context where males can offer protection. Females do most of the running and kind of facilitating this protective response. So in answer to your question, I suppose I don't know is the short answer. But I mean, there is evidence that they do, at various points during their offspring's life, do understand who they are, and do discriminate in favour of them. That certainly seems to be the case.
I'm kind of interested in going off Willem's question of adaptations on the part of the infants to not being whacked, as it were. So you mentioned that incoming males use infant coat as a cue or whatever to their age, right? Because
Well, I'm conjecturing that they do. I mean,
they have to use something,
Yeah.
because if you're killing one that's already been weaned, it's not doing anything.
yeah, exactly.
So I was thinking of the coat example. I'm not sure. So it seems like there'd be selection on the part of the infants to basically fake being older, right? So if older infants have some sort of coat that's different than the younger infants, why not just
Yeah, no,
develop
good,
that coat?
good point. I mean, yeah, I've never thought of that. That's a good point. I guess one thing to say is that invariably, when infanticide attacks, it's often the case that the infant is ripped off its mother, and the ones I've seen, and so there's an obvious cue there that you're hanging on to your mother. I mean, infants of only a certain size hang on to their mother, especially on the ventral side. I mean, that's a really good question. I'd have to sit down and think about that more. Good point. Yeah.
Let's say you're right. Are there cross-species predictions that you can test? Say one of the first graphs you showed us was the proportion of offspring side by the alpha male across different species. Do you have a prediction for that being related to, say, the probability of infanticide or 10 years of alpha males or something like that? That would either support or not your
I could kind of sit down and think of something. I mean, the first thing to say is I think, as I said before, this idea, this model I put forward, only holds in species where dominant males have this real stranglehold on a kind of reproduction, on reproductive competition. And so I would say that I doubt a concessionary strategy emerges in seasonal breeders, for example. I think that it's definitely the case that there's just too much going on in a seasonal breeding species for dominant males to really, for there to be any need to do a concessionary thing. And also, in seasonal breeders, infanticide is salient in seasonal breeders, because people used to think that infanticide wasn't an issue in seasonal breeders because breeding was confined to these given time periods, and so there was no potential for hastening a female's return to estrus because they were duty bound to have them at these given periods. But there is some demonstration now that females can miss a breeding season if their kid survives, and so it does seem to be the case that infanticide holds in seasonal breeders. But I think it's probably less salient than it is in non-seasonal. So maybe I could imagine that there'd be a difference in terms of seasonal breeding.
I was thinking more of species where you have paternity assurance or not. So for some species you know very well whether they know they're at paternity or not, and that presumably would have different predictions for whether you can have this system in place or not.
Well, the first thing to say is that you only see these protective associations between putative fathers and infants in systems where there's quite a high confidence of paternity. That's definitely the case.
Okay, I think we need to end it there.